Hey, public speaking students, welcome to the public speaking experience. With me, Dr. Steviano, your professor. No, it's hard to believe, but here I am joining you again live from the Roman Senate for our next lecture. I think we're on lecture 5 now. And this one's going to be about Stasis Theory, which in the textbook, I think is chapter 3. One day I'll prepare for these talks, but that day is not today. Yeah, chapter 3 is the Stasis Theory chapter. So have a look at that, which will go into a lot more detail. I'm going to kind of walk through it very on the surface here, really, and kind of give you a couple of concrete examples to play with to show you how valuable stasis theory is. When you're trying to attract an audience's attention, generic topics just don't work. Think about what's in competition for your audience's attention, right? You have Netflix, you have texting, you have social media of all kinds. You have people are doing everything online with little apps on their phone that beep at them all the time, that try to distract their attention. And people live incredibly complex lives. So a generic speech is not going to warrant their attention. We need to make sure that we are getting exactly to the right point where we're trying to move them to believe or feel or think or do something different than they're doing now, which is a pretty big ask of people who are pretty busy and somewhat overwhelmed and all that. Anyway, so if we're doing that, what we need to do is make sure we're hitting exactly the right place for our speech to make the best difference. And that is what we call stasis theory. Stasis theory helps us with that. It's a very old idea, and it's one that we can use on any topic. I thought I'd bring our topic here from lecture 4 in here. And I chose a general topic. Remember in the last lecture, we talked about general and specific topics. I chose a general topic to work on because I thought it might be kind of fun to go through that, through stasis, and try to figure out what it is we could say. So let's say I want to give a speech, say it's good to play video games. Okay, I could just say, it's good to play video games. They're fun. I have a lot of fun with my friends. I've met people on there. Video games are like not too expensive. You don't have a chance of hurting anybody or getting hurt. Yeah. Okay, that speech isn't going to make a difference for most people. They're just going to listen to it, and they're going to move on with their lives. They're going to say, you did a good job on your assignment. You didn't blink too much, or you didn't say too much, or whatever. But this is not a good way to proceed. It's way too generic here. We need to do some investigation to figure out what are the different angles of approach we could take on a speech like this to really make it hit home. So we'll go through the different, they call them the 4 questions in the book, but we'll go through the different stasis points as well, and I'll kind of walk you through how these work live together as I kind of work through this topic for you here on this video. So the first question is conjecture, which is what's out there? What's floating around? And this is very similar to the question of what does the audience believe? What are their commonplaces? What are the things they think are absolutely true? This is a step removed from that. So instead of stuff like a principal point, which would be, well, if you work hard, you can make it in the United States. I think that's like a commonplace point that people would hold. If you work really hard, you can make it. You can make something of yourself, and you'll be rewarded. And I don't think people question that too much or push back on that too much. That's something that most general audiences will accept as true. It doesn't matter if it's actually true or not. They'll accept that as a truth, as the nature of the world. But a conjecture point might be something like it's floating around that the stock market's doing really well, or that people are moving a lot right now and they're losing their jobs and moving out of jobs and stuff like that. So that's something that's floating around that we might talk about in terms of if you work hard, can you make it? That's like a conjecture point, which is something more related to the time that we're in. It's more kairotic. It's more related to the time that we're in the moment that we're in. So conjecture is sort of an inventory about what are the things out there and what can I say, and what are the events that have happened that make this topic relevant for our audience. And we can find a thesis here if we find something like, let's say we do a little research, and this is going to require some research, into the news of what people are talking about. What is being reported? What is being discussed out there on the internet, in the world, in media and things like that. I'm going to make this bold so I can find it again when we move down here. So let's say this is not true, but let's say we find in our research that first-person shooter video games make children more violent. Okay, now that might not help us, but it's something that the audience might not be aware of. It's not going to help us say it's good to play video games. But we might say not all video games are first-person shooters. We might say this research doesn't take into account these other things, something like that. But that's something we have to take into account. We can't just ignore that. Let's say instead that we find information that says that veterans and this is actually true. I've read an article or two about this, how psychologists use violent video games, first-person shooters, to treat veterans who have PTSD, which means that it's good to play video games. It can be healthy. It can help people with illness, something like that. So the way to think about conjecture are facts that are out there in the world about video games that might help you build your case. And you could make an entire topic on the PTSD thing. You can make your entire speech about that, because it's not good to make your topic video games are good. It might be video games are good because they help veterans deal with PTSD, or they help people with mental illness, or they help people who are autistic, or they have other kinds of conditions that we would call neurodiverse conditions, I think is the term that people use now. So neurodiversity helps them socialize and learn how to interact better with other people and the social expectations of the world. So all these things might be things you would research and find. You say, okay, great. I've got my topic. This is exactly what I want to talk about. That would be stopping at the conjecture point, because you found the place where you're going to hit the audience exactly where they need to be, to where they'll say, oh, wow, this is important. This is relevant to me. And it's something I can recognize as being true and good, right? So that's the conjecture point. But let's say we don't find anything there that we really like. What else can we do? Well, the stasis of definition, which is like, how do we best understand this? Definition is an attempt to understand. You might not have thought of definitions as that before, but when people say, can you define what you mean? It's an attempt to understand. It's actually kind of an ask or a request for a framing of something to understand it. So when people say, oh, I really feel like global warming is the biggest threat that we face as a civilization, people might say, well, what do you mean by global warming? How do you understand that? Like, I don't really see things getting hotter. What's global warming? And then that would be the stasis of definition would be to say, well, global warming isn't about temperature increasing. It's about climate change, right? That's the phrase that people use nowadays for that. So that might be an approach that would use definition stasis. For our example, it's good to play video games. We have a couple of things we could talk about that might be thesis. Video games are good because teamwork is good, cooperation, competition. Like, that might be a way of doing it where we focus on good as the definition. This is a whole speech right here. You could do your whole speech on that right there. That becomes a thesis, a main idea for a speech, right? But we can also talk about video games. What's a video game? And your audience might be very unfamiliar with this. You could say, well, it's not really Pac-Man. They are like participatory dramas where you take on a role in a novel-like story or novel-like adventure where you're asked to sort of participate and feel along with these characters. And it's just like a novel in a lot of ways. Or you are forced to make ethical choices, right? A video game is an immersive, philosophical and literary environment where you're asked to make choices and reflect on them. Oh, okay, well, that's kind of cool. But there's a number of other definitions we can have here where we could go through that, and those could become our thesis. Okay, so the next stasis point is quality, which is degree. In the book, I think they talk about it as what's bad and good. I can't remember. I didn't write it down, but it's something like what's bad and good. But I want you to think of the quality point as how much or how little. And that's what I want you to think about when you're thinking about this one. So let's say we don't really feel like the definition of video games being good helps us advance our case, or conjecture. There's not a lot of controversial stuff that we could really push on. There's nothing we really want to talk about. It doesn't excite you. Quality might be the one that excites you, which is how good are, these are like questions of comparison. How good are video games compared to other things people do? How bad are they compared to other things kids can or will do? Then it can also be questions of degree, like how much video game playing is good. So you can really talk about it's really about the amount that you do it, or how much money you can make, or how much you can develop or understand the world through playing the video games. So this is like a question of comparison. How bad or good are they compared to other things in society? You might say it's much, much, much better than being out on the street, having a chance of being hurt, getting involved in something that's not so good, having conflict with people. I mean, and video games might be understood as, if we go back to definition, as a way to practice conflict management or teamwork or disagreement, things like that. So once you're doing these, you can always move back and look at another one and say, maybe I want this to be my thesis. So policy is what should be done. So in a general one like this, are video games good? The policy might be something like, video games should be included in school because they teach so well. Now, if you come up with this one, you could do your whole speech about that and not even really talk about any of this other stuff. That can become your thesis. But all this other stuff can become subpoints of the thesis. Stasis theory is really about finding that main idea that you want to shop, that you want to sell to the audience. What's your main point? So you might say they should be included in school. They're better than other subjects. Okay, now we're getting into quality. They're more useful and better, or they teach more inclusively than our standard way of breaking up different subjects across school, like history and math and science. You can learn all of that by playing particular games that include those things as parts of the narrative or as challenges in the game. It shows you the interrelationship between things. Another one is like, if video games are good for society, communities should support. Wow. Please don't judge me on my terrible spelling here. Thank you, computer, for making me not look like a fool. Communities should support video game contests and teams for young people. So this is something that a lot of universities are doing with video game competition and teams and stuff. But you could argue and say, actually, communities should do this too. It's actually very important for them to do this kind of thing as well. So you might want to go with that as your thesis. Maybe that's a good thesis you could do for that. What else? What else should be the policies? You could even go really far and say video games are so good for society that the government should subsidize the cost of video games for people. Now that's kind of a crazy topic, but why not, right? Like, this is a class we can experiment and really try to make those connections. I'm not going to be judging you or grading you on whether you're right or wrong, or whether your idea is good or bad, but did you do the work to move us, to do the necessary work to move us and make the most persuasive case you possibly could for what you want your topic to be? So, with Stasis, it's these 4 questions that you ask that really bring out a lot of differing ideas about what a speech could be. We could do another one really quickly, a very popular one that everyone wants to talk about. Weed legalization. So let's do a specific one. We say, marijuana should be legal in New York. Okay. I'm going to do this one really quickly. Conjecture. What do we know about marijuana? How is it used? What does it do to the body? Is it healthy or not? What do we know about how marijuana is sold and dealt with now? Who does it support? How is it traded now? Do people use a lot of it now? And how much does it cost to sort of enforce the laws against it? That would all be conjecture points. Definition. What do you mean by legal? What's New York? The state, the city? And what's marijuana? What exactly are you allowing to be bought and sold. Now, these might not be great thesis points. Like, nobody wants to hear a speech about, like, here's what marijuana is. It's not terribly interesting, but I do think it might be interesting to push on legal, come with a thesis of, like, here's what I mean, because there are differences here. Is it going to be legal like alcohol, or what do you mean by legal? Everyone can buy and sell it, or only approved vendors, or only approved strains, or what do you mean by that? Then we get to quality. Whoops. Or degree. So, how good would it be to have legalized marijuana? How much more dangerous versus other things that are legal? And then how, what's the other thing I was going to say? Oh yeah, taxation. How much tax or how little tax can we make off of it? How good is it for the state? You know, we're like $30 billion in the hole, according to the governor, right? So this might be a good way to talk about how good of a solution is it for that. And that could be your speech, is that marijuana legalization helps the state meet its financial obligations. Policy. How are we going to do it? Who can sell? Are we going to have a model like places where it's illegal now, or places where it's legal now, like Amsterdam or Portugal? Two good examples of drug legalization. Or the Czech Republic, another good example of drug legalization. So this would be one about policy, where you would say New York should legalize marijuana in the same way that Amsterdam has. Here's why. Here's why this works. Here's my research. And here's why I think this is the best way to do this. Think about how much more interesting and how much more exciting and how much more attention grabbing that is than just weed should be illegal because it's less dangerous than alcohol. That's not as good as the specifics that you can get into when you really go through the stasis. I would probably do something like that. I mean, that seems really cool when I think about if I want to talk about weed legalization. I wouldn't just give a generic speech about like, it's not that dangerous and it can make a lot of money and it can da-da-da. No, you want to like move it into something that's more of making a case that's yours, where you're adding your voice and your opinion to it. Remember, opinion is what democracy thrives on, not facts, not the truth, but people sharing their ideas with others in ways that are accessible, understandable, and have the potential to persuade. It's all about us working together in communities, trying to figure out what we value and trying to figure out what we would like the world to be like through our words. And that's what public speaking is all about. It's the healthy practice of these kind of democratic things. It's not up to the experts. It's up to us. And the stasis theory is a wonderful way to see if you're getting your ideas in a way that you can really make an impact on the way other people think and feel. So I encourage you to use it to find really, really good thesis. In the next lecture, we'll talk about how to organize the speech a little bit and maybe how to find different modes of proof. But for now, I'd like you to take your topic, whatever you're thinking about doing, whether it's like you should have a pet rabbit or you shouldn't eat Cool Ranch Doritos or whatever you're talking about, and run it through the stasis theory and see what comes up. I mean, those topics are kind of silly. I would encourage you to pick something you really care about, run it through the stasis theory and think about commonplaces and think about kairos. And then you start to develop a speech that really does speak to people where they are, who they are, what they believe, what they value in a way to where they will listen to you and you actually really do have a chance to influence them and change their mind. That's what it's all about, is practicing that. So questions always welcome in the Discord, email, or on Canvas. Yeah, that's it for this one. Yeah, practice with the stasis.